Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Chit-Chat Show. Thank you so much for being here for another incredible episode number 9 today. And we're really going to be talking about the future of the Chit-Chat Show itself. So I thought we could have a bit of a self-reflection episode, talk about where we've been, where we're going, and really just get into the nitty and gritty of why this podcast exists and where I want this podcast to go. But before we get any further into it, I would like to thank our incredible partner of the podcast, Safety Wing. Quick pause from the episode. If you're someone who travels, works remotely, or spends time abroad, this is worth knowing. Safety Wing offers global health and travel insurance in over 175 countries. It's flexible, affordable, and super easy to set up. So whether you're on a short trip or living abroad long term, you're covered. Link in the description down below if you want to check it out. Now, let's get back to the podcast. Okay, so let's get into this, ladies and gents. Let's get into it. So, let's start by talking about where we've been. So, the Chit-Chat Show is now 9 episodes long, including this episode. They have all very much varied in terms of length and how we've done this. And really, the format of the podcast has also changed. Because if you actually look at the channel when we first started this podcast, it's very different to where it is today. We are very Australia, New Zealand, and travel focused right now. But when I started this channel and this podcast, we were very much in kind of a hybrid zone with the channel, is what I would call it. Because we were kind of experimenting with gaming. We had the vlogs coming out from Australia and New Zealand and Dubai, and then we were kind of having this weird mishmash of guests on the podcast as well. And I really think after episode 3, this podcast started stabilizing a little bit in terms of where our North Star was and where I want the podcast to go. Because, quite frankly, this podcast has always been about conversation. Obviously, that is all a podcast is. But I would say episode 1 was a pretty solid first episode. I'm quite happy with the result of it. It was the single largest series launch in the channel history at the time. It's definitely been surpassed by now, but it was the single biggest launch of a brand new series on the channel at the time, and I was so happy with it. It gave me the motivation to kind of bulk record the first 3 episodes in a block. So I believe, if my recollection serves me correctly with this, episode 1 and episode 2 were fully done. And then by the time episode 1 premiered, episode 3 was being recorded. So I was always working in advance. And I always find that, and I do that with the channel as a whole, I always kind of work in advance. So the videos that are coming out may be 5 days to a week old by the time you see it, because I've recorded them quite far in advance. It's like these podcast episodes. I normally record them 5 to 6 days before they actually release. Sometimes they may even be further, like there's a longer gap between recording and upload, because especially if we have a guest, I'm working on the guest schedule, not my schedule, so I actually need to work around them, and then the podcast may have been ready for a week and a half, because I believe sometimes when I've recorded with guests, we've recorded it the day the podcast has just gone out. So say, for example, today, for example purposes, of course, I am recording this podcast right now, which is episode 9, the Chit-Chat Show, and episode 8 would have gone out today. So I recorded it the same day the previous episode's gone out. That occasionally happens. That's not happening today. So by the time you're hearing this episode 9, for example, it's currently Sunday. So I'm not recording it quite a week in advance. I'm recording it 5 days in advance. It's Sunday the 10th of May when I'm recording this episode. So as you can see, I do kind of work in advance, and I had the idea for this podcast. So I really thought we could get into the nitty and gritty of it, and obviously just try and do stuff. But anyway, moving on. When I do believe after episode 3, the podcast started stabilizing in terms of themes, Because if you look at episode 1, 2, and 3, they are so polar opposites and polar different. For example, episode 1 was all about me recapping in a bit more detail what my Australia journey was and my Brisbane flight fiasco and stuff like that. And then episode 2 was very much gaming focused because we had a gaming guest on the podcast. And because I was doing gaming on the channel at the time, that was kind of where that vibe came from. And I believe I was doing my Minecraft Split Survival series, which is still up on the channel if you guys are ever interested in seeing the gaming content. I believe it's now actually easier to find on the second channel because I've got the playlist linked there because it makes more sense to be on the second channel. But and then episode 3, obviously we had Luke as a guest for the very first time on this show, and I felt very privileged to be in a situation, even with how small I was as a creator, the fact I got someone like Luke, who I just DM'd out of the blue. Like, I was really shooting my shot in the dark with situations like getting guests on. I still technically am when I'm trying to arrange guests, but basically what was going on was the fact that I was just DMing every travel content creator I could think of. So I was just firing off a very standard copy and paste DM that I could actually do, and I was just firing them off ballistically. And I was like doing emails, trying to find their business email address. I was trying to do anything I could to set, because episode 1 was so good and episode 2 was such a significant drop off. It has picked up since it's been live on the channel, and obviously more episodes have come out. It's definitely picked up a bit, but the initial drop off from episode 1 and episode 2 was horrific. Considering we had the biggest series launch, the drop off between episode 2 was actually quite bad. So I was trying to do everything I could to save it, and I was just lucky, privileged enough that Luke wanted to join the podcast, and now he's been on twice, and I'm like, I am so grateful the fact Luke said yes, because I don't think this podcast would have survived, quite frankly, if Luke didn't say yes. I actually think this podcast would have been cancelled after 2 episodes. So I am grateful to Luke for actually, coming on to the podcast and really not only uplifting my spirits as a creator and putting faith back in me as a content creator as a whole, but I also believe that it added a bit of drive to me to continue to produce content, because that was a time where I was really considering quitting, and it did give me a bit of motivation to basically just kind of go all out, fire on all cylinders, and basically get this channel to the point it is today, which is a place I'm very happy with, where we're actually upholding a very consistent CTR with the channel. I don't want to get too technical with YouTube terminology with this episode here. But after Luke's episode, me and Luke have stayed in very frequent contact behind the scenes. We've thrown around video ideas that have never been made or are still in the progress of being made, or we have just floated ideas to each other. For example, we didn't use the collab feature with this video, but we have done top 10 things to do in Australia. That will be linked on this podcast episode as well if you guys wanted to check out that video. That was quite cool. I have this is kind of one of the biggest issues with podcasting as a whole. Because I'm a solo host, I can only talk about so much for certain amounts of time. And I just kind of, it's not so much a feeling of being burnt out, because it's definitely not that. I still have the drive to do it. It's the fact I run out of topics to talk about. That's kind of where I hit my brick wall. Because I've explained my Australia and New Zealand journey in depth. I guess I could technically go on about Paris or Rome if you guys want to hear about that on the podcast. I'd be more than happy to go more into detail on that. But it definitely was a struggle, and I've basically done everything I can to get more guests on this podcast. I really wanted to do three episodes, three guests running, but it just hasn't come together for this week, obviously, because I'm back solo with this episode. Um, and it's I just wish the situation with this podcast was a little bit different. I have wanted to get Chasing Dane on this podcast for ages, and I have thrown the ball into his court quite a few times, and nothing. I'm not going to hold it against him, obviously. He's a busy guy, and he's got his own channel to run, and he's got the new group trip that he's setting up. So I'm not going to obviously hold it against him. If he doesn't want to be part of the podcast, he doesn't have to be. He's not obviously legally obligated or anything along those lines to obviously be part of this podcast. I just think he'd be a really cool guest to have on, so I have messaged him. But this is kind of where you guys need to come in clutch and kind of tell me what you want to see with this podcast, because I can obviously talk and talk and talk, and this is kind of the similar issue I'm having with the channel as a whole at the moment, which is ideas. Because I could do tons of stuff and tons of ideas and Australia kind of hypotheticals and stuff like this, but when it comes to creating those ideas and getting ideas to do YouTube videos, it is just horrific, quite frankly. And I do sit there sometimes and kind of go, I have absolutely nothing to talk about for a YouTube video. And it is hard because as a creator, I feel like with Australia and especially New Zealand and my travel journeys as a whole, I've covered everything. So I don't really feel like there's much left to talk about. I don't believe there is, to be honest, because I don't know how many times I can talk about the same thing in different ways. Because obviously there's so many of you now joining this channel and joining this community and joining this kind of journey, I guess, of the channel so quickly that I don't know whether any of you guys are going back to watch the old videos or are being served through the algorithm. Obviously, some of my older stuff. I know very recently I had a comment on an old unboxing video from January, February, and that made me think maybe the algorithm is starting to push some of my older content, but it to be honest, is just a bit disappointing. Disappointing is the wrong word. I do apologize for that. It's more a lack of content to talk about with the channel. So, for example, let's take the biggest issue that's kind of caused a bit of controversy on this channel, which is the Brisbane flight situation, okay? So, I don't know how many times I could talk about this. I've spoke about it in terms of YouTube Shorts, TikToks, podcast episodes, being episode 1, where I really briefly spoke about this. And then I also spoke about it in my episode with Luke, both episodes with Luke, I believe I brought this up, and Backpacker Mike. And it's just kind of, when I do more videos about that same very topic that I have spoke about for ages, as a creator, I start getting the feeling that I'm repeating myself a hell of a lot. And it's not an enjoyable feeling to try and repeat yourself a million times. And it's just a little bit bad, if you get what I mean. Like, I'm not having fun making the content, and therefore my cognitive ability tells me you would not like watching the content. So we kind of hit a bit of a roadblock and a bit of a stalemate with that situation, especially. But I had this kind of grand vision for this podcast when I first launched it, back with episode 1. And even before episode 1, when I was just thinking about the Chit-Chat Show as a whole and as a concept. And that was a multi-platform conversation talk show type thing where we could really get into the nitty and gritty of various conversations across various topics. That was kind of the base principle idea of this podcast. So it was going to be on multiple platforms. We were going to have guests across their professional expertise, whether it was gaming, travel, YouTube, editing, mental health, politics. We were literally going to kind of go across the spectrum. But obviously I've definitely reeled that back in now I've started the podcast to kind of be pointed very much in the same direction as the channel as a whole, which is definitely obviously travel focused. The podcast is definitely leaning that way now. Past couple of episodes, we've had a couple of... And I do think that is the best case scenario for this podcast. It was definitely kind of the travel lane was definitely the way to stick this podcast. That way I can kind of isolate my guests, and I don't obviously mean physically, I just mean that way I know what type of guests to get on this show, and I know who to look for, and I really want this podcast to start starting conversations. But I mean, if we look at the stats very quickly for the podcast, the podcast kind of fluctuates too heavily for my liking. So this is kind of where you guys need to come in clutch as viewers and just really explain to me what you want. Because if we look, still the most popular episode on this channel is Luke's first appearance, which was episode number 3. And then Luke's reappearance with episode number 8. Or 7, sorry. That was the second most viewed episode. So definitely when Luke is on this show, it does really well. My Backpacker Mike video is not doing too bad. That's got 39 views currently as of recording this. It may have gone up since then. And episode 1 and episode 2 are currently sat at 54 and 57 views. But then some of the videos on my own where I've tried experimenting or tried really changing the podcast as a whole, from like countries I want to visit, conventions and expos, they have absolutely tanked in terms of viewership. And that isn't so much me purposely trying to tank the show, of course it isn't. It is more me trying to expand the horizon with the original idea of the podcast being multimedia, multi-genre. And I'm trying to kind of lean into it without drifting too far away from travel, and it just seems to absolutely catastrophically fail. My Dubai special video didn't do too bad, to be honest with you. I'm not overly concerned about the Dubai video tanking because I have the vlogs on the channel to obviously compensate. So the Dubai special isn't doing horrendously. But yeah, I know a lot of people on TikTok, especially because I do a lot of TikTok live streams. If you don't follow me on TikTok, guys, link in the description down below. I do a lot of original TikTok content that never makes it to YouTube. So if you guys want to check out any additional content, link in my bio. But the actual multimedia approach for this podcast, because at the minute, obviously, you may be listening on Spotify, you may be listening on YouTube, or YouTube Music, depending where you want to, obviously, watch this podcast from. The original multimedia approach has definitely been slowed down. So, for example, when I was first trying to put this podcast together, I had this grand vision where this would be a podcast across YouTube, Spotify, Amazon, potentially like Pocket Casts, Overcast, like all these massive podcast apps. And I am still planning that the Amazon one will eventually happen, obviously. It definitely will eventually happen. We will be on Amazon Music podcasts one day. And in terms of expanding the format of the podcasts to bring in video, because I know a lot of people like video podcasts, that is also in the works, guys. I'm not going to say it will be the next episode, but I do think it will be coming sooner rather than later. So big news for that one. But I do heavily believe that with everything this podcast has been through and the ups and downs of the episodes and everything like that, this podcast future is a bit more hazy than it ever has been. Obviously, I'm not quitting. This isn't me announcing I'm quitting this podcast. It definitely is not. But it is also me being a little bit more open with you guys as listeners that I'm unsure about the future of the podcast. I will commit through to you now. We will commit through to episode 15. So you're going to at least get 15 episodes of the Chit-Chat Show. If you're a creator listening to this or someone with a story, I want you guys to find me on my Instagram and I want you to pitch to me where you think you belong on the Chit-Chat Show. This is a kind of open casting call. If you guys want to be on the Chit-Chat Show, you want to have a episode, you want to be featured in one of these running up to 15 episodes, you guys can now have an open casting session. Whether you have an interesting topic, whether you're a traveler, backpacker, whatever, you guys can now jump on the podcast and we can record and have a really good conversation together. If you're a YouTuber, I will obviously use the collab feature. You'll get your shout out. You'll get your little moment of spotlight, as this conversation will kind of be about you mainly as a guest on the podcast. And my viewers get to learn more about yours, and your viewers get to learn more about me. And it's going to kind of be a very nice audience share moment. But anyway, guys, it's going to be a little bit of a shorter episode of the Chit-Chat Show. That is going to wrap it up here, 20 minutes or just over. As you can see, these episodes really vary in length, and I would really like to get this under control. But after 2 episodes running that have been over an hour, I did think a shorter episode might be a little bit better. So thank you so much, guys, and I'll see you next time.